The Jeep Grand Cherokee 4Xe Summit Reserve. We've already covered the Jeep Grand Cherokee, where I interviewed engineers, designers, interior designers, really everyone involved in this car. And we did a very deep dive from a technical perspective. This is going to be focusing on the 4Xe, which is their plug-in hybrid drivetrain for the Grand Cherokee. This Summit Reserve with the 4Xe is $79,000, which is a lot of money for a Jeep. So in this video, we're going to be covering what the 4Xe brings to the table and whether or not you should be spending this much money on a Jeep product. But first, let's talk about the interior space. This again is an expensive vehicle, and for the most part, this is every bit as nice as its European counterparts. That's not something I've been able to say about Jeeps in the past. The leather is great, the wood looks expensive, most of the touch points, like the bright work and the control structures, feel pretty good. The screens in this car and the software are excellent. There's good visibility, and the cabin is very, very quiet. So at face value, it's a nice place to be. So there are cheaper models of this vehicle, and some of the touch points and plastics come from those cheaper models, which really does bring down the quality of this interior space. Some of the plastics on the steering wheel, the plastics on the center armrest, where you put your hidey hole basically, and the plastics around the cup holder feel ultra cheap and do let down this cabin. The other big con in this cabin space is the piano black. Jeep is not alone in overly relying on piano black, but all you have to do is look at the steering wheel, the plastic around the shifter to see how poorly this ages. It's already all scratched up. This car only has 8,000 or 9,000 miles, and it gets covered in biohazard material very easily. It's kind of disappointing. The other con of this cabin space is the Macintosh audio system. It's not great. It's definitely not what you're expecting in an $80,000 car. All it takes is about 2 seconds in something like a Volvo equipped with the Bowers & Wilkins to realize that this is not a good audio system. Here are the graphs. It's kind of a letdown. And I do bring up these negatives for one reason, and that is hopefully Jeep takes these criticisms and improves this cabin space, because it really is a nice place to be, and all it's going to take is a couple minor tweaks to make this a truly world-class cabin. So let's head in the shop and put this thing up on the lift. Underneath the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4Xe, let's get some housekeeping out of the way, and that is price. No, you do not have to spend nearly $79,000 on your four-cylinder plug-in Jeep Grand Cherokee. You can spend in the high 50s instead. They have a base model, they have an Overland, they have a Trailhawk, which is their more off-road capable variant, and of course there's the Summit. Again, this with every option on it is 79 grand, or at least the way this has been equipped. So what about the Grand Cherokee? Well, we've done a very comprehensive video where I interviewed engineers and all of their fun stuff. So brief overview on the platform. It's multi-link front and rear. You can get optional air ride and a variety of different transfer cases for the all-wheel drive system. It is a very sophisticated platform underneath. Everything's covered up, and it is a big step forward for Stellantis. This looks every bit as nice underneath as some of its German and European and Asian rivals. It's a very impressive platform. And if you're prioritizing your ability to go off-road, or more realistically, bad weather, snow performance, the Grand Cherokee does definitely have an edge up over its European competition. Basically, the only thing in this price category that has similar off-road capability is something like a Range Rover. So what about the 4Xe system? Well, it's very similar to what you've seen on the Wrangler. It uses a four-cylinder Hurricane engine, which produces 270 horsepower and 290 foot-pounds of torque, and it is mated to two electric motors, one on the accessory drive belt and one between the transmission and the motor itself. Combined system output is 370 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque. It has a 17 kilowatt-hour battery, which is protected by skid plates underneath the vehicle as well. In ideal circumstances, when this thing is fully charged, you get about 24 to 25 miles of pure EV range. So it will run purely in EV unless you hit a certain speed or a certain throttle application. Then you can drive in full hybrid mode, which uses both the electric battery and the electric motors, plus the four-cylinder for the combined system output of 370 horsepower. When you deplete that battery entirely, you are running primarily on the gas engine. While they claim there's enough battery reserve left over that if you are doing a 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 launch, for example, you shouldn't notice a massive horsepower or power decrease. If you are constantly on the gas with the battery depleted, you will start to notice that you are entirely relying on the four-cylinder. A primary example of this would be, say you're towing for a long distance. You will then be primarily using the four-cylinder, which is a little bit of a disappointment, to be honest. There are 3 different drive modes: hybrid, electric, and e-save. If you put it into e-save, it is prioritizing the gas engine to charge the battery so you can then go back into a hybrid or EV mode. So with that out of the way, let's take this thing for a quick drive and let's talk about how the 4xe system works in the real world. Starting off in the Grand Cherokee 4xe Summit Reserve, we are in electric mode. Let's see how that feels. If you're driving this around town and you're not exceeding the speed limitations of pure electric, it's exactly what you're expecting. Pretty good torque, and you hear nothing other than the small whine of electric motors. So, if you drive this as in hybrid mode, which is honestly what you're going to be spending most of your time in, then there is the gas-electric handoff. And if you reach a certain speed or throttle application, the four-cylinder, which on its own makes 270 horsepower and 290 foot-pounds of torque, kicks on. The combined system output, assuming you have electric range, is about 370 horsepower with 470 foot-pounds of torque. Again, that is a bit misleading because it requires full charge, and you have to be within the parameters, all the other fun stuff. Realistically, you're probably not going to be achieving those numbers all that often. And I think that's where the sort of downfall of the 4xe kind of pops up for me, is this is a sort of a limited application use case. So you have to have electric range, you have to be within the parameters. Otherwise, you're driving an $80,000 four-cylinder Grand Cherokee, which is kind of rough to accept. And it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with this four-cylinder, but compared to some of its competitors at this price point, things like the B58 and the BMW X5e, which is every bit as expensive as this. In fact, it's basically equivalently priced to what you get in a Volvo XC90. This isn't as refined, and it's really showing its, let's call it, more mainstream application roots. This is a very kind of buzzy, non-premium sounding four-cylinder, and that kicks in all the time if you're driving fast or you run out of EV range. This has a very limited use case, and in some ways, I prefer the 3.6 or the 5.7, despite both of those engines being more thirsty. That said, this, at least in my application of driving about 500 miles, I drove this out to Lake Geneva, I drove this all around the Chicagoland area, and not putting my foot down all the time. I got 21.5 miles per gallon, which, is not particularly tremendous if I'm going to be entirely honest. And that's really, I think the drivetrain is what hurts the Grand Cherokee so much for me, because as I mentioned in the interior space and in the shop segment, a lot of what the Grand Cherokee does is very, very good. It has a good architecture, it rides well, it's double wishbone, it's very capable off-road, or more realistically in bad weather and snow. But it's a platform to me that is waiting for a more premium, more expensive feeling drivetrain that suits its character better. This hybrid system is relatively new to Stellantis Group, and it doesn't feel anywhere as seamless as what you get in a Lexus or Toyota product, which again are equivalently priced to this vehicle. The gas motor in either the 6-cylinder or this 4-cylinder or the 8 don't feel as premium as the German or even Korean or Japanese counterparts. Those motors feel a lot smoother to use, and the gearbox tuning in this vehicle, while it is nowhere as bad as something like the Ford 10-speed, isn't all that seamless. Most of the time you don't notice it, but if you catch it up, meaning you're quarter throttle and suddenly you go full throttle if you need to make a pass, or you're trying to get across an intersection, it sometimes shifts really abruptly, which is hard to capture on camera, but it really does sort of disturb you. And in a family vehicle, a more premium, expensive land yacht, that's not what you want. You want the drivetrain to feel expensive. You don't want to notice it most of the time. And again, that's my problem with this particular product. It's not that I have anything inherently against the Grand Cherokee, but at this price point, at $80,000, you have to really love Jeep or really appreciate the plug-in hybrid nature of this drivetrain to spend this kind of money. So with that, I think it's time for us to head into the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. This is a nice car. The interior space, for the most part, is pretty impressive. The platform it's on is very sophisticated. It's refined. It's multi-link, uses aluminum everywhere. It's got air ride, and probably the most capable four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive system in its segment. If you prioritize off-road capability and, well, really bad weather capability, the Jeep is sort of in a class by its own. The problem is the 4xe system makes the Grand Cherokee a very expensive car. It's no longer a value proposition vehicle. It no longer competes with things like the Ford Explorer or the Honda Passport or Honda Pilot or Telluride. At between, let's say, $58,000 to $80,000 is competing against things like the Lexus RX, the BMW X5, and the XC90. And what this Jeep lacks is a refined drivetrain. This four-cylinder is out of things far cheaper than it, and the hybridization isn't entirely seamless compared to something like the RX. Lexus, Toyota have been doing hybrid systems for a million years, and those systems are seamless and return very impressive fuel economy. For my money, I would spend less money. I'd get either the regular 6 or the 8-cylinder, spec one of these under $60,000, and it's a really, really impressive, good value product. So with that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.